looking forward to this for a long time, it seems like. I'm really excited to introduce Paul Santmire. And the way I'm going to introduce Paul to this group is the idea that not only I feel like he was really the fertilizer for Lutherans Restoring Creation by being the one who originally, a handful of people, but really Paul was the one that pulled together the 1993 statement that we all keep going back to, that all of our whereas statements keep referring back to in our Lutheran family here. And now this book is like this refreshing water that has been now fed to all of us that, got our roots started with a lot of your work, Paul. So I just want to thank you so much for providing that in the long term. I also want to introduce Heather, who I just thank so much for being co-host, because there are a lot of people on this call, which is exciting. Heather Denkmeyer also happens to be Paul's daughter, and also happens to be the person who, if anybody has been with Lutherans Restoring Creation long enough, do you remember when our site was just a lot of everything? It was a lot of everything, and it was beautiful and had great stuff. But as Heather put it, she felt like she went into a hoarder's house and gave us shelves. And I thought that was a perfect way to put how she was able to make our site wonderful and hopefully more manageable. So I want to thank Heather for many, many things, but especially for what you all see as our website and where we're able to amplify what each other does so well. So thank you, Heather, for being here and for helping me DJ and click buttons while I talk. I never do very well. So with that said, Paul, welcome and thank you. And look at how many people are eager to not only hear what you have to say, but probably have read a bit of your work, if nothing more than the 1993 statement. Your work has really helped us get going. So I want to welcome you. And my first question for you, I get to ask the first question, is I kind of want to know, how does it make you feel? How does it make you, Paul Santmire, feel to see these faces on the screen? I know you've been doing one-on-ones with a lot of people, but how does it feel to see all these people here tonight? That's my first question.
This is amazing. Once upon a time, there were like 3 or 4 of us who were trying to say, take hold of people's shoulders and say, this stuff is really important. You have to pay attention. Now I can just sit here and there are people all over the place. And not only this group, but a whole bunch of Lutherans, ecumenically. There's Pope Francis and Laudato Si that has happened, which is maybe the most important religious document of our time. So what has happened is that this area of discipleship, this area of reflection has just grown enormously and creatively, and different things are going on all over the place. I cannot keep up with things anymore. There was a time when I read every single book that was written in ecological theology, and when I sort of knew what all the issues are, but I just can't keep up, and I try. And I see this community here tonight as representative of the richness of what God's doing with God's church.
Yay. So you feel good?
I do.
Amen. Excellent. The other, so I want to warn everyone that we did get a lot of questions in, and there are a lot of people on here, but as you are on here and think of more questions, or if you've just finished up or just started his book, if you have specific questions about the book, feel free to write it in the chat. And if we don't get to it, I'll have the chat log, and Paul will get back to you because you're retired. So,
right,
yeah, so plenty of time, just ask away. But we're going to start off with the questions that were submitted earlier. And one that I think encompasses a lot, and you can go on for a long time, I hope, is who did you write this book for? Who was in mind?
It occurred to me, sometimes it takes me a while to discover the obvious, but it occurred to me that there are many disciples out there, many who are struggling to be disciples, who are concerned with our eco-justice crisis, our global crisis, who are deeply rooted in the church, at least on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when they're not struggling with their faith. And they're doing pretty good. I mean, you would ask anyone on this call tonight, and they were talking about creation, caring for creation. They would talk about the crisis and how we're supposed to love, especially those the poor and the dispossessed, and how they are really hit the most by this kind of crisis. So I don't have to really add anything. I don't have any instruction to give people. I mean, I have a lot of things to learn from people who are at the front lines. That's the way I feel about it. So in that kind of situation, I said to myself, you know, what is it that you could do? Well, I have a little time and I've had a little experience, and I've, you know, been working with the scriptures and the theological tradition and lots of things like that. Maybe what you all need is just a little support, you know, and as people of faith, or people who want to be people of faith, you all are open to theological insights. I mean, that's what you do. And so I was saying to myself, you know, maybe just tell some stories, tell your own experiences. That could be helpful. It may not be, but it might be helpful to someone or a few people if you just sort of tell where you're coming from and how you experience your faith. I mean, where is God? I mean, yeah, you look at a sunset, you know, you have an encounter with a person who gives you insights. I mean, there are all sorts of ways, but most of you folks, if I may generalize, are on the front lines trying to get things done. And I'm asking you, maybe take a step back, take a breath, and say, you know, what's going on? What's God doing? Where do I really encounter God? So those were the kind of concerns I thought, sort of like a theological footnote for a bunch of disciples. That's what I thought.
And you're really good at footnotes.
No footnotes in this book.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, and really, to answer your question kind of visually too, these are the people that you had in mind, I imagine.
Precisely.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we were listening. So it was way back in July that this question was sent. So I certainly wanted to lift this up right away. And Krell, you're here. So I don't know if you remember everything that you wrote, but I'm going to read it because it was a lengthy edition here. So, but it's also, I think, fun to read. Do you remember writing it, Krell? Maybe? I hope so. We'll see.
No, I don't.
Oh,
I don't remember.
All
what
right,
I
we'll
wrote.
see. Hopefully it wasn't when you were still sick with COVID, and it's anyways.
Right.
We'll see. So at that time you said, I have it in order, so we'll look forward to reading it before the conversation. So we'll quiz you later. But I will be curious to explore with you and others how an appeal to hopefulness in face of dismal scientific projections in the history of human folly might avoid platitudes of divine sovereignty. For example, God's in control, or God wouldn't allow such an evil to happen. So that the possibility of divine desiring and human aspiring might coordinate in saving the planet. It's a kind of unfailing hope beyond hopes, I'm suggesting, because God's love has been poured into our hearts, a la Romans 5:5. That's called for in our present dire circumstance. So you could probably teach a class on that.
And the question is?
So Krell, go ahead. How would you wrap that up in a question now that you have him in front of you? You're on mute.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I guess as I started out that lengthy post, in feeling a bit uncomfortable with statements like God has this, right? Or God is in control. or that God wouldn't allow such a terrible thing as a humanly uninhabitable planet.
Okay.
I see those things as very real possibilities.
Right. And where is God in all this? You're trying to, is what you're asking.
Right, right. And, or maybe just to be able to say, you know, God has entrusted us with a responsibility that we need to step up and do, or there will be consequences.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, that's kind of where I'm coming from there, is rather than simply dismiss it all or say, well, it may look pretty bad, but in the end, God's got it covered, so don't worry about it. I just have a little hard time with that.
It sounds to me, first of all, that you did a very good job at answering your own question, I think. But let me tell you what comes to my mind when you pose this question. One of the things I've discovered in recent decades that I know less and less about more and more. In other words, that there is just so much that we don't know. I mean, there's a whole bunch of scientific stuff, but theologically, all the more so. I prefer to be modest in terms of theological claims, and you know, respond to the big questions. Why is there evil in the world and all sorts of things like this? But I'm more interested in getting through the day, if you know what I mean. That what is the next step that God is calling me to take, and do that yet with the confession that there's an enormous amount that we don't know. I mean, the theologians sometimes get into the habit of trying to figure out ultimate reasons. If I may put in a plug for Lutherans, Lutherans tend to know a few things very well and to stand in awe of the mystery of God for most of the time. That we believe that that God is love, and that love will triumph, and that God has revealed God's love to us in Christ and claimed us to be with Christ and to walk the way of Christ. That's about it. And the question of why there is so much evil in the world, I mean, this comes back in every generation, but it's particularly acute for us now. And actually, there's some that you didn't mention. From a scientific point of view, if you project the future of the world is really going toward the universe, toward a state of dead frigidity. And here, we card-carrying Christians believe in a new heavens and a new earth. I mean, two more radically different affirmations you could not have. Now, there are some who try to weave that together, and I affirm that. I mean, God bless them. But for myself, I prefer to hold on to the smaller, more modest things, beginning that God has given me a vocation. Okay. God has not given me an answer. God has given me a vocation. And that I believe that I am called to respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and not any old Jesus, and not even just a Lutheran Jesus, because Lutheran Jesus is sometimes, and you end up being a very anthropocentric point of view. That is, what is it all about? Am I saved? Hell no. It has to do with the world. For God so loved the world. That's what it's about. It's not, it's not, if it's just me, you get into lots of trouble, because why not, well, I won't go there. It's just that I believe that God so loved the world, and that God has called me to be a witness to that in word and deed, especially deed. Now, I think I'm going in circles here. Would you help me out of my last circle? What do you hear me saying?
Well, I just see a lot of nodding and even thumbs up and that sort of thing. So if you were in class, you'd be able to see all of the waving. I think what I'm curious about, especially with this particular group of people that are on the call,
Yeah.
I mean, you started off saying that you realize how much less you know about, how did you put it?
About everything.
Right. And I think those of us on the call feel validated recently by our church saying, yes, we need to reduce greenhouse gases. This is a matter for the church to take on and advocate for. So we feel like, okay, the church has our back. Now, what do we practically do? There must be one way to fix this. And I think, and why especially reading, I think the last part of the last chapter was read at our last Lutherans Restoring Creation board meeting to close us in prayer, because we have to remember that there is no one answer. We'll never know anyways if our one answer was the answer. And that if we don't do it in right relationship with each other, it doesn't matter anyways. And if we don't do it in right relationship with understanding that we're not going to be able to do it all, then we've missed the point of believing that we're not at the top, which is.
Yeah, and then to just tease that out a little bit, as I thank you for reminding me about what I said, that it's really important for us folks to get together and to break bread and drink wine and to talk about hope. I mean, that's a lot better than me trying to go along and figure whether, God can overcome evil and so forth. Every Sunday, and more often if possible, to be with people who are also for sure in the same struggle and who are hearing the same word again in our midst, and who everybody has stories. Everybody has a breakthrough moment, however small it is. And if you can share that, you can sort of add them up and say, maybe that's how to figure out how the whole thing's working out. That there are little pieces of hope here, and they point in the direction of cosmic consummation of all things.
So I have another question for you.
Okay.
That came up from Baird. Can you you can unmute Baird if you're there?
Hey, Paul. Hey, everyone. This is Baird Linke. I'm a seminarian at Wartburg Sem, doing my pastoral internship here in suburban Cleveland. So it's good to be with you all tonight. Paul, I really enjoyed reading your book, and I think that in a lot of places you spoke directly to my needs as someone who needs to delight more, I think, in what God has in mind for us as we go about this work. At the same time, in the lectionary, we've been reading a bunch from Amos, and I am struck by the line, I despise your festivals and take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I won't accept them in the offerings of your well-being, and I will not look on. I won't listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. How, in your mind, do we know that we are a church that is grounded in its being in the worshiping community and the spiritual life of the church, how do we know that we're erring more in the direction of the church that Amos is calling out? And how can we recognize that and rein ourselves in and redirect back to the roots of what the fruit of worship is supposed to result in, which is that stream of righteousness?
Yeah. The question that you're posing here just has to do with my whole life. And let me tell you a story. When I was, I don't know if I mentioned this in the book, I tell this so many times. When I was a sophomore in college, did I mention this in the book? Okay. I discovered for the first time, you may find that difficult to believe, this was in the early 50s, 1950s, the Holocaust. And further, I discovered in a German history course how complicit a whole number of German Lutherans were in the rise of National Socialism. And that thrust me into a real crisis of faith as a college sophomore. And I was a sort of a card-carrying Lutheran my whole life. Went to church camp and Sunday school and all the rest. And I was, I even did some witnessing around the country. I was part of an evangelistic team. We went from place to place and talked about Jesus and so on. And that all, I began to lose all that because of what happened with German Lutherans, and not only because of German, but because of some fatal flaws in traditional Lutheran theology. And what happened then is that I got some good counsel from Lutheran pastor, and I started to read Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And one of the things that Bonhoeffer, good Lutheran pastor, who was part of the plot to assassinate Hitler, was killed by the Nazis because of that. One of a book that probably everybody knows called The Cost of Discipleship, but the German is really just discipleship. One of the things that Bonhoeffer did was really take issue with traditional Lutheran theology, which is focused on justification by faith. He didn't deny that for a moment, but he said Lutherans tend to skip to Romans and not read the Sermon on the Mount. It's the Christ who died for me, not the Christ who said, follow me. And so he lifted up the Sermon on the Mount and obedience to Jesus as the key part of his theology. Now, remind me your question again. Summarize what you're asking.
Yeah. What should we be looking out for so that we know that we are grounded as the church in its being without sliding into that complacency of the church that Amos is talking about, where we're going through the motions of our religiosity, but we're not letting it change.
So Amos is I'm always hearing Amos, that Amos 3:2, you only have I known, therefore I will judge you. And yet Bonhoeffer says that the way to do that is by working on obedience, and not just by myself, but in the community. And obedience for him meant not just personal obedience, but political. And that was a great insight for me, that we are engaged in a political struggle in a special sense of that word, and we're not just being a good father, being a good citizen, voting and all that kind of stuff. But we have a call to exemplify the life of Jesus Christ through obedience. And that may mean that we have to organize, that we have to subvert, establish things. We may have to go against the church of our time that maybe brought us up and we love so dearly, but we have to stand over against us. So I don't have an answer to your question, but I have a direction, and that is to open the door to what it means for us to be faithful to the calling that God has given to us in these times, which is so obviously global climate change, and yet at the same time involves judgment of ourselves. I'm sitting in a second house now in southwestern Maine. I'm comfortable. I could go on and on about that, and people who are American and Lutheran at the same time, not everybody, but a lot of people have that story of being really comfortable. Now, how do you become obedient? What do you do? I mean, do you go with Bill McKibben and go and stand by that pipeline? I mean, I think that's a real option for us and perhaps more. So that's the direction I would take in terms of obedience and public witness and public testimony to our own identity as people who are called to be followers of Jesus, who taught us the Sermon on the Mount.
I think Bill McKibben would be so impressed that you use the word obedient to Bill McKibben. Anyways, disobedient is typically the word associated with working with Bill McKibben. I love that. And this is to connect now to a few questions came in that I think are relative to what you just said. And that is, you might know of examples, but in general, how can we blend our faith-based actions with the secular community? Do you know of good examples of that happening? I think we have a few people on the screen right now that are making that happen, that I know I get to work with, but how do we seamlessly, or I don't think diplomatic is the right way to put it, but how can we work as faith-based organizations? Authentically. That's
yes. Yeah. Here I also find Bonhoeffer very instructive. One of the things that he talked about in his letters and papers from prison was humankind come of age. And what that meant for Bonhoeffer, well, he was thinking mainly of the resistance, and he was only one of a very few committed Christians. There were labor union people, there were professionals, teachers, a whole bunch of people who had little idea what the Christian faith could possibly mean in this regard. But he plunged in with them, and he talked about humankind come of age, and that once again, as sort of a Christian participant in this, I have this calling, but it's not to gather into a little group and make believe that the world doesn't exist. It's to identify what God is doing out there in the world. And for Bonhoeffer, it's a bunch of secular people. Most of the people who are resisting against Hitler were not the religious people. And so he identified, and he thought sometimes of his own father, who was a physician and quite not very much a believer. And there are a whole bunch of other people in the resistance whom Bonhoeffer admired enormously. And they didn't have much at all to do with the church. So I don't think it's, once you put your mind to it, this is not a real problem. You just get out there and you work with what God's doing, because God is not just working with the church. Okay, God is working in the world in other ways we don't understand. That's my belief anyway.
And some of the examples in the room, I know that Pat Allman wrote, to put you on the spot, I know you've been part of very secular movements as a member of a faith community. And I don't know if you want to speak at all to that experience.
Thanks, Phoebe. Folks, I know some of you, and I'm happy to see you. Others I don't know, but I live in New York City. I'm the secretary of Lutherans Restoring Creation's board, and I like to joke that I'm among the furthest removed from nature on the board. But I've been involved with 350 NYC. Bill McKibben has come up already in this discussion. 350 NYC is the local affiliate of his organization, 350.org. And I've found myself over the years, occasionally, not persistently, but occasionally, sort of, I get funny looks. People are taken aback a little bit when they find out that, you know, my motivation is from my faith. And I don't have a particular answer to that. I just, you know, say, yeah, that's why I'm here. Happy to be marching along with you. And, you know, then we just go on. Frankly, I think nowadays it feels to me like a pretty good way to do it, because I'm not equipped to proselytize really, other than just by being there, other than, you know, by, as I say, marching alongside. And I feel like I've had some small effect on people who might otherwise think of, oh, those Christians, or oh, those religious people, we don't want them involved because they're going to be controlling, or they're going to try to persuade us to do something we don't want to do. So it's sort of, in my circles, unfortunately, it's representing religion as thoughtful and caring and rational, you know, rather than something else. But I think that's probably something we all do all of our lives, really. And I don't mean to claim any special, you know, special authority with that.
No, that's very Bonhoeffering. Bonhoeffer had a construct, the secret discipline of faith, that Christians are called to gather and do what we do with word and sacrament, and you don't go out and tell people about it. I mean, you just go out, and every once in a while someone says, you know, why are you doing what you're doing? And then if you feel the time is right, you say, well, you know, I'm a part of this group. It's a weird group, you know. We do cultic things, and we try to love one another and everything else. But that's why I do it. Like other people have other reasons. So I'm with you all the way. That makes a lot of sense to me. That evangelism, which is sort of the rubric we're entering, at least at the edge, is much more a life story than saying the right thing. Don't you think?
I love it. I'm so glad this is being recorded. I do have another submitted question too. And I see that John Otto is on the line. John, do you want to ask your question in the flesh? If you want to unmute, go ahead. Oh,
I was asking you one just now, but I'll ask one to Paul. And it's that it strikes me that our ELCA and other mainline churches, our sense of mission is closer and closer to what our Jewish sisters and brothers call tikkun olam. And I'm curious what you would say that we as Christians have to offer beyond tikkun olam.
Now tell me what you mean by that.
The healing of the earth is usually translated.
Okay. What we have more,
If
Or
you
what
ask
kind
a
of-
Reformed Jew what they're about, they will tell you tikkun olam. And I feel very aligned with that. And I'd
Yeah.
like to know what you think we have to offer beyond simply agreeing with them and working with them. And that on the basis of what they believe in their theology.
yeah, I think there's so much solidarity there, and the First Testament is shared among us and our Jewish brothers and sisters. One of the things that speaks to me from the New Testament angle, however, is the theology of hope. I mean, once upon a time, I read and understood Jürgen Moltmann through and through. And Moltmann came out of World War II asking himself, is there any hope? He had been a prisoner of war, a German from a prisoner of war in England. He realized that that whole Nazi experiment was a disaster. And he raised, his first book was The Theology of Hope. Is there any hope? And I think there are many people who are part of the Jewish community who have a wide variety of answers to this. And I can't speak to that. I just know there's diversity. But for the community out of which I come, that this is one of the things that we hold up. And in particular, and this sometimes gets me into trouble because it brings me near to some of the evangelical folks and all their apocalyptic imagining and so forth, which doesn't speak to me. But it seems to me that one of the things that we are called to do as Christians is to witness to the new heavens and the earth through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that we are holding up not just that something good might happen about some kind of discipleship we're involved in, but what's going to happen eventually is the new heavens and earth in which righteousness dwells, where the lamb lies down with the lion. We look forward to this kind of transformed future. And that, preposterous as it is what shapes the here and now, which allows me to focus on the next step rather than on completing the whole program. Because if everything, hey, you give a preacher a chance to talk, and watch out. If everything's going to eventually be fulfilled and redeemed, I don't have to do it. I just have to respond to what God gives me to do here and now. So in a strange way, a strong eschatology or hope in a new heavens and a new earth liberates me for the present, I believe. So that's the way I'd approach that. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo too on John's next question too, that rolls into, I think theologically speaking, you spoke to what makes Christians different in this moment, or what are our particular tools. And practically speaking as well, our Christian churches have a lot of money and are part of this economic system. And so leaning into a little bit of what John's asking, and then also to just where do we stand as a church as far as being part of an economic system that has a role in this to play. And, here I am, I'm looking at Kim Winchell right now. And she was the one who not only got me into this in the first place, but and helped teach people how to work on this from the pews, but also was the one who helped usher our the closest thing we have to divestment as a Lutheran church. She really helped usher into being. Where, you know, the people that manage our money are not going to read any of your books. They're not going to listen to this. They're not. But so how are we being obedient? How can we follow what we know to be true as this group of people, and use our power as a Christian group?
I'm glad to hear Kim's name. Once upon a time, we were conspirators on some of these things. I'm a supporter of all this stuff. I don't feel that I am on top of the latest issues on this. I basically do what Bill McKibben tells me to do. I mean, and I think there's something to be learned there. Not everybody has to figure everything out together, but you sort of have to know who's doing what and who's trustworthy and who's imaginative. And I really want to learn from others on this one. And if anyone disagrees with Bill on something, I will think about it. But I think the kinds of directions that he's taken over the years, I think are exemplary.
And I'm curious too, how many people here they've been on calls where we've talked about Third Act and a faith team emerging from Third Act. Is there anybody here that can describe a little bit more about how faith can work into this? Pat, can we hear from you again?
As it happens, I'm one of the co-facilitators of the Third Act Faith Working Group. Back in October of last year, I caught the very tail end of an interview that Bill did with a radio host here in the city. And he was talking about Third Act, and I said, this is perfect for me. I'm in that age cohort. I already have worked with Bill and some of, other people in 350. And so I said, sign me up. Where do I go? So we are in the process of trying to get organized. It's a little like herding cats, except it's all over the country, because we're aspiring to be a national working group of Third Act. But if you go to thirdact.org and look for the Faith Working Group, you can sign up right then and there, and you'll get an email from me. We are ecumenical, we're interfaith, we're not entirely Christian. But we would welcome anybody that wants to come on board.
I'm with you.
Thank you. And in general too, I know a few people are asking, and there's a lot here, and I'm going to savor this chat, and I want you all to know that what you put in the chat will be added to our general post that I think, I want to go back to a lot of the ideas that you've already shared, Paul, and kind of hit replay on them over and over again, which is what I like about this book, that there were definitely times in this book where I thought, I don't think I got that. And then I read it again. But because they're mostly stories in this book, I got to walk through, rather than in some of your other books, I really did have to pause and read the footnotes and then go back again. So I just want to lift up that all the treasures that are going on in the chat. I just really appreciate that people are sharing and sometimes going off on other ways here, and I'm not following all of it. I'm still trying to get through kind of the original set of questions that were set in. So I apologize if I haven't gotten to yours, but in general too, we have found that there are expressions of this happening through every faith and denomination and many non-faiths. And I am curious though, because there are people here with us tonight that have been with the Lutheran Church in many ups and downs and seen many different facets of it. I'm curious, as your experience in the church, from writing the social statement back in 1993 to the arc of where you see us now and being helping to usher Lutherans Restoring Creation into being, do you see it as progress or as a messy circle? Or what do you see from your standpoint of seeing this, the ELCA emerge in this?
I think the ELCA on these issues is the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, that one of the things that has really impressed me about ELCA, perhaps there's a bunch of things that has depressed me, but one of the things has been is that Lutherans have really taken the lead on these issues theologically and thinking things through ethically. There's sort of a way of going through. These are the principles. These are the issues. These are the things to which we commit ourselves. It's sometimes a little maddening the way Lutherans do social statements, but at least on the eco-justice front, I think it's been marvelous. And that if one of the things I did in the chapter 1 of my recent books is to simply name the names of the Lutheran theologians at the end of the last century and into ours that have made substantive commitments in liturgy and in ethics and in Bible, that there's a depth of Lutheran theology that this whole theological statement is rooted in. I read the new proposal for the revision of the social statement, and I think the original one really has borne the test of time. I mean, it can be revised, it can be updated and everything else, but it's been very good. And I think it's no accident that Lutherans Restoring Creation has emerged out of this history. And the advantage is that it's no longer the theologians who are doing the talking. Back when we were working on these things, there was a bunch of theologians who were trying to grab hold of the shoulders of the church, shake the shoulders of the church and say, pay attention to this. We have all these resources in scripture and tradition. Pay attention to it. And we ought to have these ethical conclusions coming out of this theology. Pay attention to this. We don't have to do that anymore. It's really become grassroots, and it's not only Lutherans. I mean, there's a whole bunch of groups like LRC, but LRC is the one I know. And I think what we started back with that first social statement, and even before in 1973 or something like this with the LCA statement, has really borne fruits in a way that we never could have hoped for in those days. So I think we're at a pretty good place in terms of grassroots engagement. And ecumenically, we're not alone. And it's hugely important that we have Pope Francis leading the way with Laudato Si. And the Catholics are all over the place, particularly the monastic Catholics. I've said a couple times, I think this is the golden age of ecological theology or eco-justice theology. I think we're in a very good place, and Lutherans are part of this creative ferment, he says.
Thank you. And Ted, I see your hand up. I don't know if it's in reference just to what Paula just said or, but you're on mute.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, Paul, because I used to work mostly among Lutherans, and more recently I've got more involved in the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted by 193 nations in 2015. And they're catching on as a frame of reference within which our teachings can resonate most widely with people that we otherwise wouldn't have connected with. And the one of the goals, there's 17 of them, and I don't have them all memorized, but there's one on the climate change, dealing with climate change, another one on dealing with the oceans, another one dealing with life on land. And then since I've been working very much on anti-racism work and through the Sacred Ground program that the Episcopal Church started, and Lutherans have picked it up, I see all kinds of ways in which everything we do to deal with anti-racism also fits in to the struggle to redeem the climate and to get the kind of collaboration that's needed, because it's racism and ethnocentrism that has prevented us from doing the kind of collaboration that needs to really heal the world. So I'm just delighted we got your book, and we're going to read it as soon as possible. And I want to really affirm what you're saying about how everything's interconnected, so that we are, as Lutherans, have done a pretty good job, I think, of stirring the pot. But now we've got to really open our eyes and ears and listen to everybody else who's working on this, and recognize we've got neighbors that we can affirm without having to make them be like us.
Amen. Amen. And that's a great note to start wrapping up with. And thank you so much, Ted. And to lift up to what Ted was talking about, there are 17 of those. Sometimes they take me aback because there are so many. But I think, again, to lift up the fact that the stories that you present in here, Paul, when we're presented with so many different things to work on and feel like we have to do it all at once, this book truly helped me just understand that you're not going to do it all, and that's okay. But I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to those of us who need nourishment and need refreshment. We don't need more fuel. We feel empowered by our rage, but we also need to temper it with nourishment. So thank you. This is great nourishment.
Thank you.
Paul, is there anything that you want to ask of us or one closing message before I have asked Katrina Martik to close us in prayer, but I would like to give you the floor one more time.
Well, maybe pick up on what you just said. The last chapter of the book is about doing nothing. And I really think that if we're attentive to that calling, that's a gift that Lutheran Christians particularly can bring to the ecumenical global movement, that we know that we don't have to save the world, but that we are called to participate in the struggle to save the world. And the link in that is taking a day off and going to church and just being fed. Taking a day off and taking a walk. Watching the sun go down. Today I was it was a very joyful day. I'll close with this. For me, I'm in southwestern Maine, and I have been wanting for a year to gather in a fallen cherry tree. It was a huge cherry tree that I cut out, but I didn't want to bring it in too soon. But there is all this wonderful cherry wood out there waiting for a year, and I've been trying to find a time to bring it in, but I had to wait. You don't want to burn wet wood, right? So I gave myself permission that this is the day to bring in the cherry wood. And I think there's something theological about that. There's a time, sometimes you have to wait. So, and I want to thank everybody, as long as I have this is my last sentence, that for being interested in my work, but most of all for doing what you do. I thank my God because of you. You are at the front lines, and I have a few things to add, maybe at the back of the line here and there. But you are at the front lines, and I salute you, and I'm grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. You see our hands thanking you. And Deacon Katrina, thank you so much for offering to close us in prayer tonight.
It is my pleasure. Peace of God be with you.
And also with you.
Good and gracious God, our creator, source of our life and all that we have, we give thanks for these gifts of creation that have resulted in technology, which brings us together. And we thank you for the wisdom and words of Paul Santmire, who has fertilized and watered the grassroots movements of Lutherans who are stepping into the vocation you gave us to serve and protect all of your creation. We confess that we struggle to see a good outcome for the many challenges we face to live in right relationship within your creation. We want to live differently, and yet we see ourselves trapped within systems that demand us to be participants in the destruction of all that you have called good. And yet your people throughout millennia have felt small in the face of injustice, and you have always been there, calling your people forward, calling them to be your partner in bringing out your kingdom here on earth. And so now we ask that you comfort those of us who are afflicted with despair, and afflict those of us who are too comfort to hear your call. Open our eyes and ears to what you're asking us to do today. Remove our hubris and white supremacy that assumes we are called to fix everything, and give us the humility to accept the small parts you give us each and every day, which come together to build your kingdom here on earth and move us into being who Christ has led us to be, the servant leader that you have given us, and who ultimately gave his life for us, and in whose name we offer this prayer. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Preach, Katrina. Amen. Thank you all so much. I will be sure to post this to share with many people within 48 hours so you can find it on our homepage. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Also